To be here and to be able to share this. I hope it helps some people.
You know, I always admire people of faith who, when they do have a difficulty, whether it's something as tragic as yours or the everyday trials of life, decide that they're going to not blame God, have a good attitude, and move on. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your story and what you've been feeling, and we want to help the people watching today because I know a lot of them are probably going through the same thing.
Well, I would say that my story's kind of in two parts. You know, there was the part where we were battling the cancer, and Rochelle was really battling the cancer.
Yeah.
And then the second part was, you know, when she finally did pass away on December the 30th. And so it was about an 8-month battle for us.
And what was that like for you, getting all those treatments?
It was just, you know, incredibly difficult, as many people know. You know, it's, you know, of course, what I went through was nothing compared to what she was going through. It was very hard. You know, it was very difficult, very, very emotionally draining, spiritually draining on me, my kids, my friends, my church. It was hard on all of us, and obviously hard on Rochelle. Everything kind of came to kind of a pivotal point in my life on December the 23rd. We were at MD Anderson in Houston, and things were very difficult. Rochelle was not doing well, and it was very hard. And we had a hotel room next to the hospital, and I was walking. I left her room to go take a shower for a minute, and I'd already settled in my mind that we were going to spend Christmas by ourselves there, and because our family was all back in El Paso. My daughter was a week away from having her baby. She couldn't travel anymore. And my son was doing all of our Christmas services, and so I had to be there with her. And I was walking back, and there was a sky bridge there, and I sat down on that sky bridge, and I felt, for the first time, Joyce, in the whole 8-month process, I felt overwhelmed. I just was kind of come to the end of myself. And I was sitting on that sky bridge, and I began to pray, and I really believe that I began to make, the Holy Spirit began to make intercession through me.
Yeah.
And I prayed just some very simple but powerful things. Looking back on it now, I realize that it really kind of set me down a good path. And the first thing I prayed was, I said, you know, Father, whatever happens here, I said, and I'm hoping you let her stay with me.
Right.
I said, but whatever happens here, I'm never going to ask you why. I'm never going to question why. I'm never going to ask you why. And I never thought of that. It just kind of came out, and I heard it. And then I said, unexpecting that I would say this, I said, because what happens here is not about me and you. It's about you and her. I said, and whatever happens is between you and her.
We do try to get into things very frequently that really, to be honest, really just are not any of our business, because there are personal things between an individual and God. And certainly, she probably drew very, very extremely close to God.
She did.
During that time of discomfort that she was going through.
She did.
And I try to share with people all the time just the uselessness of having to know why about something that you're just not going to understand. There are things in God that we just don't understand. There are mysteries in God that we don't understand. And a large part of our trusting God and our believing in God and our relationship with God is not just for when we get things the way we want them, but when things happen that we don't understand.
Yeah, you know, I think that there's a scripture in Psalms, I don't remember exactly where it was, you know, where David said, I don't concern myself with things too wonderful for me.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
And I quit concerning myself with that. It's not literally, the second thing I prayed was, this is none of my business. This is about you and her. Yeah. I did say to the Lord that day on the cross bridge, I said, I just want you to know, in case you don't know, that if she passes away, you're going to have to explain this to her. I said, because she's not going to come in there willingly.
Yeah, I heard you say that on a teaching tape I was listening to, that St. Peter probably had to pull her in because she really wasn't wanting to go.
Come out and explain this to her at the gate, you know. So, and the second thing I said that night was, you know, she's always been your daughter. And you loaned her to me as my wife. but she's always been your daughter, and she'll always be your daughter.
And you know,
that
just
brought
for
me a lot of
comfort
peace.
for people, something that's coming up in my heart is I'm sure that there are people watching right now that thought, well, if I would have known that my loved one was saved, I could be more comforted. And but I just kind of feel led to tell you that, you know, you don't really know what happens to a person in the last few seconds of their life. And even that, you have to leave that between them and God, and don't torment yourself over something that you're never going to know or understand. And I just want to reiterate here that I think this, I know I talked to you just, I don't know if it was the day after she died or 2 days after.
The day after.
The day after you called me, and I remember how just profoundly spiritually impressed, if that's an okay word to use, that I was when you told me that you had told God, I'll never ask you why. Because that is probably the number one thing that people do. They demand having an answer to something that really they're not going to have an answer for. I mean, even if you figure something out that you think suits you, it's not going to be a good answer. And how wonderful it is to be able to say, God, even in this tragic thing that is so painful to me, I trust you.
I looking back on it, Joyce, I think that was probably what set me down the path to where I am today. That I just, and I would love to take credit for it, but it wasn't me. It was the Holy Spirit in me. And I really believe that in making that decision, that it then opened me up to the future.
I do too.
Because if I had stayed there, I would still be locked back. Because I am convinced that I would still be asking God why, and He wouldn't be saying a word to me.
Right.
It's none of my business.
Yeah.
It's none of my business. And it's what happened there was not about me and him. It was about her and him.
It is very hard to understand why someone like Rochelle, beautiful woman, being used by God, helping so many people, just really in the prime of life, would die. And then you have people that are seemingly as mean as a snake.
Yep.
You know, that just live on and on and on and on. But one of the things we have to keep in mind is that God is a lot more concerned about eternity than we are sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And Rochelle's future for eternity was settled. And a lot of these people who don't know Christ, theirs is not. And we need to thank God that He is more long-suffering with them and continues to give them an opportunity. You know, we're going to return and continue talking with Pastor Neiman. We've got some other very beautiful, I think, comforting things to share with you. So be sure you stay with us. Well, certainly losing someone that you love can feel overwhelming. But God is our comforter, and He will help us through the pain of our losses. With me is Pastor Charles Neiman. Well, Pastor, we got a good start in the first few minutes of the program talking about how even though you had a terrible loss in your life of your wife of 45 years to that disease we all hate, cancer, that you made a very important decision early on, actually before she passed away, that you would never ask why. Now, why don't you just continue on, because I know there's a lot of people that are really hurting, and that was a very important first step. But what are some other things that has helped you to recover?
I would say that immediately in the next couple of weeks after she passed away, that I basically, looking back on it now, it didn't come to me like this, but looking back on it now, there's been like 4 major things that I've done and continue to do that have really just solidified my life, my kids, my church. The first thing I knew when I was driving home that Sunday morning, I was at the first service, our first Sunday morning service when she passed away. She made me go to church that day.
Made you go to church. I like that.
And so I was driving home, and I had a few moments in the car by myself, and I prayed kind of a Texas prayer, and I said, you know, Lord, please don't let me screw this up. You know, help me.
Well, actually, that's important. I remember hearing that on your teachings, and I kind of want to just explain to the people what you meant by that. That as a believer, as a man full of faith, as a man leading other people, and even just as our witness as a Christian, what did you mean by don't let me screw this up?
Well, I knew that I could not let my kids down. I couldn't let Jesus down. I couldn't let the kingdom down. I couldn't let my congregation down. I couldn't let my friends down.
You didn't all of a sudden want to act like you didn't believe what you'd been teaching people all your life.
No, I believe in the abundant life as much now as I ever have.
Right.
And that, you know, Jesus came to give me that life and came to give that life to
And that He
Rochelle.
loves you. And
Absolutely.
this didn't happen because you did something wrong.
No. I don't know why it happened. It just happened.
It just happened. That's
You know,
right.
Welcome to life.
God knows.
Yeah. And so, you know, I just said, you know, I just don't let me. I'd seen people go through this, and I've seen them collapse and
lose their faith, turn away from God, blame God. Yeah.
And I'm not going to do that. You know, we have a legacy, and I have this relationship with Jesus that I am not going to let anyone steal from me. And Rochelle would be furious with me if I did, and I'm not going to do it.
That's good.
So. The first thing I knew, number one, I knew without the Lord having to say anything to me, I already knew this, that I had to get back in the house of God as soon as possible. Because Isaiah 40 verse 31, the King James text says, they that wait upon the Lord. But in the Hebrew it says, they that gather together before the Lord shall renew their strength.
That's good.
I was exhausted mentally, emotionally, spiritually. My kids were worn out. My church was worn out. My friends were worn out.
Right.
But me personally, I was exhausted. And yet, as you know, you can't call time out. You can't say, hold it, I'm going to, you know, everything stop, go in suspension while I recoup. No, in 20 minutes, I was going to be at home with my kids, and they were there, and they were grieving, and my friends, and I was going to have to tell the church, and here it goes. It all goes in a new direction now, and I was going to have to step up, Joyce. I had no choice. I had to step up. I wasn't going to start looking for someone else. I had to step up. I could not fail. I could not fail.
That's good.
And I would not.
That's much better than just thinking, well, now I have an excuse to just totally fall apart.
When I was in my car that day, one of the things I prayed was, I decided that in that car, I said, I'm not going to go through life with a limp. And I'm just not.
Good.
I'm not. And so, you know, I got home that day and started doing the things with my family I needed to do. And the next night we were having our New Year's Eve service, and you know, I had people saying, well, you know, who's going to do the service? And I said, well, I am. I'm going to do the service. And people were like, you're crazy. And I said, no, I have to get in the house of God. I have to go where the church is, because there I will get my strength renewed. There I will mount up with wings of eagles. And I did that service. I did the Wednesday night service. I did the memorial service on Friday night. I did all 4 weekend services, and I haven't missed a service since. And in fact, I've done all my services at church, and I've taken speaking engagements around America and around the world. Not because I'm running from, I'm running to. I'm running to where the strength is. And
where
the
God
strength
is
in the house of God. It's among God's people.
And then what were some of the other
The second thing that happened to me is that I went back to John 11, where Jesus raised Lazarus, and that incredible statement there where he said, I am the resurrection and the life. And you know, I'm like you, I'm a teacher. I'm always looking up words and studying words. And I looked up that word resurrection, and Jesus said, I am the stand up and the recovery. I am the stand up. And I realized for the first time in my life that when you get knocked down, and I hear people say, Pastor, and they mean it. They say, Pastor, I just can't get up. And I know that feeling.
And you can't by yourself.
You can't. And then I realized for the first time in my life, I don't have to get up. He's in me. And if I will let him, he will get up. And when he gets up, I'll get up with him. He'll pull me up with him. And so I was in my bedroom one night crying and feeling bad and hurting, and I started meditating on that verse, and I got up out of my bed, and I purposefully imagined inside of me, it wasn't like a vision, I did it myself, and I saw Jesus stand up. And when he stood up, I stood up.
That's good.
And that he is my recovery. And then he said, I am the resurrection and the life. And the word life means I am the life that satisfies, dwelling in that life. And I had to say this, Joyce, and it was a very powerful statement, and I really pray people hear me when I say it, because what I said then was, I said on Sunday morning, December the 30th, Rochelle left me, but he did not.
Right.
And I cannot say, and we cannot say, and I know why people say it, I really do, but I could not say, I can't live without her. She did not give me life.
Right.
He gives me life. And She left, but he did not. And so I had to take that burden off of her,
Right.
that she was the one that I live for, and I had to put it on him because he's the one that he's the life that satisfies.
And I think people even have to be careful about developing a mindset as the years go by that, well, my kids are my life, or my spouse is my life, or my ministry is my life, or my business is my life, because none of those are our life. They're part of the life that God gives us, but he is our life. And I thought that was also a very good point that you made, that we have to realize that it's not people who hold us up and keep us going. They encourage us, they edify us, we love them, we enjoy them.
Absolutely.
They encourage us, but Jesus is our life.
He is that life that satisfies. And by reminding myself of that in a greater way than I've ever understood it, then I was able to keep going forward. And then the next thing was, 2 Corinthians 11, it goes back to what happened to me on the Sky Bridge, but Paul makes that list of all the things that happened to him, beaten, robbed, all that amazing list. And I was looking at it one night and I thought, he never said, why me?
Yeah.
And if there was ever anybody that could have said, hey, why me? Why not Peter? Peter's the one that denied you. Remember him?
Yeah.
What about Thomas? Why isn't Thomas getting beaten with rods? Why? Why me? I've never denied you.
Right.
And he never said that. He never said, why me? And I thought, I'm not going to say why me, because it wasn't me. It was Rochelle.
That's good. That's very
It wasn't
good.
me. And then the last thing is, he took me into 1 Samuel 30 with David at Ziklag, and he was having a good, life was good. David was doing good in chapter 29. It said he was living upright. And I've always known, as you do, that sometimes really crummy things happen to good people.
Right.
Right. They just crummy things happen to good people.
Yeah, they do. Things you can't explain.
Can't explain. And that day, the Amalekites came in, took their sons, their daughters, their wives, burned their house, took all their possessions. Horrible, horrible day. And it says that the people turned against David. They all wept until they could weep no more. And then the men turned against David, and they were going to stone him. And it says, because the hearts of all the men became bitter.
Right.
And Joyce, I knew from personal life experience the danger of bitterness. And there's two negative human emotions that are spoken of as having a root. One is the love of money, the other one's bitterness.
Yeah.
And roots, as we know, you plant a tree in the backyard and the roots come up in the front yard.
Yeah.
And I've seen bitterness start in an area of life where people can justify it. They can justify it, totally justify their bitterness. But 10 years, 20 years, that bitterness is spread into every area of their life. The dictionary defines bitterness as intense hostility.
Right.
And people become hostile. They become angry, and
Mean.
they begin to take it out. And you end up 15, 20 years, nobody's around you anymore. Nobody wants to be there. They still love you, but they don't want to be around you anymore. And I think David saw that. I saw that. And I've had guys ask me, say, how are you dealing with bitterness? And I said, I don't have anything to be bitter about.
That's good.
This didn't happen to me. It happened to Rochelle. I wasn't the one that went to the treatments. I wasn't the one that
That's good.
had the surgery. I wasn't
You're
the one.
not the one
that
that's
was,
not here anymore.
Yeah, I'm still here with my grandkids, with
Yeah.
my family, with my friends, with my church. I'm still here.
Although I bet she's happier than we are today.
I hope so.
I'm sure in the presence of God that she's happier than we
she's
are.
dancing like crazy.
Well, sadly, Charles, we're running out of time here, so I want to
Okay.
just make a couple of comments here to bring comfort to the people that are watching. God is a God of justice. And I love that aspect of God's character, that no matter what unjust thing may have happened to you or like you, if you will keep the right attitude and not get bitter, not say why me, not get into why God, why. God will bring justice in your life. I can promise you. It's another way of saying God will make it up to you. You know, I was abused in my childhood, and God has so made it up to me. And I've already heard you say a couple times that some really great things have happened to you. Just God's way of showing, I'm gonna make this up to you. I'm gonna help you. Charles, thank you so much for being